going a slightly different direction, because you made me think of something we were talking. As you've been producing the different training aids, one of those, like you said, is electronics detection. In the electronics media detection, we're like I always share, it's the same thing we're just talking about. There's a lot of things we've done based on what we thought we knew. There's been additional research that tells us, well, there's also this to think of when it comes to electronic media detection. Now that you produce stuff and you've looked into it, obviously we know in one camp, TPPO, which is like a soldering agent, was the recommended item to train on. And I did that. I did that in the very beginning, and then Stefan Peterson of the Dutch police and Dr. Ade Schoen of the same program conducted a 2-year research project, and then they were saying tantalum and PCB board had the best generalization, way better than the TPPO. Now, obviously, the TPPO camp that is still very popular is going to go, it works, it works, it works, because look at our dogs find stuff. And then when I switched and did what they recommended, we had really good success. We have one dog in LA that's outperforming all the other dogs that do the TPPO. But I look at part of that is good handler, good dog is in the equation as well. But I also did a third level, which is I just started training the dog to find what I wanted to find, which was SD cards, thumb drives, and just showed it that picture as often as possible. What I did discover was the dogs could tell the difference between the media items that had data on versus that were just out of the package. So I've had to share a lot of times with handlers, make sure you're training the dog to, because it depends on what the crime is. For those that are in probation or parole, they may not be allowed to have any device. But in other circumstances, we wanted the evidence on the device itself. So again, depending on what you're training the dog to do, dictates what the target is. So what do you see based on your research that is relevant or important? Should we train on just individual chemicals, or should we train on the picture of each type of device?
So I've heard two different compelling arguments on electronics. One was exactly what you said: run your dogs on SD cards, run your dogs on thumb drives, and run them a lot, and they are successful at that. And maybe that's a perfect answer in that situation. What has worked really well for us, and we actually took your advice,
Mm-hmm.
was we coupled tantalum powder with a printed circuit board that has had electricity run through it,
Mm-hmm.
because it does smell different after it's had a charge versus prior to that. And we had a dog, I'm going to say about a year ago, that was supposedly a certified electronics dog, and I think he'd only been uh, imprinted on TPPO. I'm not positive of that, but that's kind of what I was led to believe.
Mm-hmm.
And that dog walked 4 articles during a search warrant. Now we know that the dog walked 4 articles during a search warrant because the humans found them.
Mm-hmm.
So later, they re-imprinted the dog on our combination of tantalum powder and printed circuit board with electricity run through it. They reran the dog, and obviously they had some distractors. The dog hit every single one of the articles. So there was
Perfect.
a significant improvement in the dog's performance in doing that. And we've had other people tell us that, their dog finds all the electronics. And so we think that that's a pretty good recipe, but we're always
Yeah.
open to new ideas and improving that.
Yeah, it is a unique, like when I share it when I'm traveling around and I tell, people that do this kind of work, I said, right now we're kind of, it's the Wild West phase, right? There was the thing that was, in this case, Connecticut State Police was the first to kind of say, hey, we reached out to our chemists say TPPO. And that was kind of like the golden rule for the longest time. And again, to this day, thanks to the nonprofit that exists that provides dogs for free to agencies, that's their same methodology. Um, and again, there's, as anything else, it evolves. And I feel what the Dutch did was take it to the next step and then did further testing, because when the Dutch police reached out to Connecticut State Police, the way I understood it was They shared the data to the Connecticut State Police. Connecticut State Police was like, thanks, but no thanks. We've been doing it this way and we're highly successful. So kind of like you, I was working with some government 3-letter agencies in the DC area, and I put stuff out that was from my, like right out of my GoPro camera, micro SD cards and other things. And I didn't even put it out like hard to find. And there were some struggles. And I've done the exact same experiment to the dogs trained on the tantalum powder and the PCB board, and they had less struggle. So separately, not connected to the research from the Dutch, I'm doing very similar, just kind of baseline testing, odor recognition plus real world testing, and I'm seeing the same results. And again, taking the next step too, just teach the dog to find the things. I've had even better success than the TPPO part of it. Now, I do think what really happens and why the belief is the way it is on the TPPO side is this kind of depends on the dog team. The dog, how sensitive and good its nose is and how much it wants to work, along with a good handler, reading the dog well. There's enough success that it validates their argument. They're like, hey, yeah, no problem. But I also feel there isn't enough independent testing to validate the argument for the TPPO as much as there's been testing on the tantalum powder PCB board mix. It's a little out of balance based on what I've seen, but then there's that history and the human bias confirmation that kind of drives the train. And what I also see, there's another little huge curveball in the whole mix there, is when an agency gets a dog for free and the trainer who provides the dog for free says, this is the way you're going to train it, this is the way you have to certify to it, they're not going to argue it because they got the dog for free. So therefore, they're going to continue doing it that way, whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent. And your administrators are going to be like, well, we don't want to avoid our contract. We don't want to have any issues. So just shut up and color and do it this way just because it's free. Now, if they were charging for this, I think we'd have a different story going on. There'd be more, I would feel like more customers that were getting these dogs would be asking more questions or doing more. But when it's for free and it's the Wild West, this discipline is so new, it doesn't really do well to challenge or evolve if you don't want to rock the boat or change the status quo, for lack of a better term there. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. And I agree with you. I think technology itself is a tough thing to kind of keep up with because how long are we until some other media device is the way to go? And obviously maybe we're going to be going away from certain types of devices because there's the cloud aspect. Now, obviously, criminals don't prefer cloud type activities or storage because it can be hacked into, it can be examined forensically and so forth. Where if I have a device in my possession, unless I get caught with it, I can protect that better. So yeah, it's a, not to go too far on a tangent or on a soapbox here, but yeah, it's a unique, detection discipline that is in its infancy, and there's a lot of moving parts to it that have to be considered. And I challenge both sides just to constantly try to find ways to be better. I don't care necessarily what way you do. I just want you to think about it and ask questions. Don't be afraid to kind of push back and say, does this really work? Or let's just say I was that nonprofit. If I wanted to prove my way was the best, I would invite subject matter experts in to say, hey, come blindly test any team I train. I'm happy to do it. And I look forward to the data that's shared. And if I truly believe that I'm right, then it will stand for itself versus a lot of the control that I hear of you can't train there, you can't certify there, you can't do this, you can't do that. That for me brings up red flags that we should be concerned about. But again, when it's free, don't rock the boat. Let's keep doing what we're doing.